Hello, my name is Arist von Schlippe. I'm professor at the Witten Institute for Family Business. And today I would like to talk about the paradox of the duplicated family to you. Business families and the perspective of the theory of social systems. What do I want to talk about today? We start, of course, with an introduction and end with a conclusion. And in between, I'm going to tell you something about families under stress, my experiences with these families, and then the way how we started to understand the paradox of business families. And then I will come to an example where I show a little video clip about working with this family. And then I will tell you something about our core theory, the duplicated family. What this means, you will see. And we end with a conclusion. Okay, let's start. Introduction. Business families are a strange kind of families. They are not just families, they are something different also. And it's similar with companies. They are not just companies, they are something more. But what is this more? And ever since family business research began, scientists were confronted with puzzles that family members and managers already know well since long, and found solutions more or less creative, more or less sustainable. And look here at the picture, you see Oedipus being confronted by the Sphinx. In a similar way, the double face of family business is highlighted in the literature. We stand there confronted with a dragon who says, okay, you have to solve this puzzle, solve this riddle. And that's the way how researchers are challenged to solve the puzzles and explain these strange phenomena that we find in these families. You find contradictions, ambiguities, dualities in the field. Every good has to take a bad into account, and vice versa. Positive resources can turn into negative resources, and you never are sure where you are, what you have to do with these families. And quite often in the literature and in practice we come across the word paradox. Our main topic for these days, for this conference, I just give you some examples in the literature. My personal perspective is I speak here as a systemic family psychologist, family therapist, which was the basis where I started from, a conflict consultant, especially for business family, and as a family business researcher. This is, so to say, my personal three circles model. So I will put the focus on the family and on what they have to accomplish in solving or dealing with paradoxes. And by this I would like to introduce the theory and research tradition of the WIFU, of the Witten Institute for Family Business at the Witten University in Western Germany. Thus, these are not my thoughts, but the result of more than 25 years of systems theory-based research. Among many others, I'd like to name persons like Rudi Wimmer, Fritz Simon, Tom Rüsen, Heiko Kleve, Anna Haider, Thomas Klaus, Andrea Calabro, Marcel Hülsbeck, Hermann Frank, Andreas Hack, Alberto Jimeno, and many more. And I want to acquaint you with social systems theory. This is a theory developed by Niklas Luhmann, a German researcher. It's a theory which is quite well known in Germany, but less in the English-speaking areas. We have some articles that have come about in the last years, and we have some translations of the basic seminal works of Niklas Luhmann. Let's now zoom in families under stress. And again, I will tell you a little bit of my first experiences as a clinical psychologist. My professional career started in 1977 as a practitioner in clinical psychology and family therapy in two different child guidance clinics. And in 1981, I went back to the university just to get my PhD in clinical psychology at the University of Osnabrück. And my research focus was on families with seriously and chronically ill children, mainly diabetes, cystic fibrosis, asthma. And families, like all social systems, which is a core of the theory of social systems, are built around communication. Yeah? So the elements of the social systems are communications. We come back to this later. And so my research focus was how does family communication change due to the presence of the big monster, the dangerous, sometimes even lethal illness that the family is confronted with. How does the communication change? What does it do to the family communication to live with this big topic in their life, the chronic illness? And the problem is in this that any crisis at any moment force the family immediately to react. All other communications have to be interrupted when it comes to matters of life and death. So this was what I was dealing with in my dissertation and the years later. And it is like they have a cuckoo in their nest, and the cuckoo always says, the first worm goes to me. Whatever you do, it's always the first worm to me. So the chronic illness has become the organizing principle of family communication. Everything is surrounded on the communication is going around this chronic illness and dominates the family life. Then it was our goal at that time that we support these families to put the illness in its place. For example, one family said it, when we started dealing with you, the instruments for the children were put in the living room, in the core of the living room. Now these instruments are in the room of the child, and we gained a little more space for our family. But of course, the illness doesn't just go away if you regain normal communication. So these families always still have to deal with constant irritation and disturbances. It remains difficult for the families to escape the problem trance that they easily get into. So that's what I learned in my clinical work. What does it to a communication system which is under constant pressure and permanent irritation? Well, and then I came to Witten. I came to the institute, and I was a new member of the economic faculty. The discipline was totally foreign to me, completely new tasks, new topics, new concepts, even in a way a new language. But that was interesting to me, that I realized the families that I had to deal with now, in a way, they were not so strange. They were familiar to me. Of course, the topics they talked were totally different, but the structure, I could observe many similarities with the families that I had worked with before. Business families also, they experience constant irritation. They have a big social system in their direct surrounding that demands, like the cuckoo, the worm please into my mouth, yeah? There is an external system in the immediate neighborhood and they enter the lives of the families. And this topic, this social system, is demanding, and it can't be ignored, and it constantly requires the family to decide on issues that families are not used to decide about. Okay, the structure was familiar, but of course we found also many differences. Owning a company introduces a logic into the family that is unusual. Even more, in many situations, business logic really contradicts family logic. And the slogan, business first, is often enough just nothing more but a futile attempt to solve the dilemma. Let's, for example, take the justice paradox. Business logic contradicts family logic totally in this respect. Give the shares to the best, you give the shares to the one who goes into the business and runs the business, and give the other children some money or houses, but not the shares of the company. Oh no, says the family. Give every child the same share because everything else is unjust. So the justice logic of family and company contradict totally. And most families that I have to deal with, are confronted with this paradox and try to find ways to solve it. And inheritance and succession is, of course, one of the most dangerous moments in the life of family businesses. And that's only one example. We have several areas where business logic and family logic bring the families into paradox situations. Paradox, we will have a closer look immediately on what is a paradox. A paradox is experienced as whatever I decide following one logic is wrong in the other logic. This is more than a conflict. A paradox is whatever I do, in a way, it is wrong. And this is something which business families quite often experience. Oh, now we go a little bit closer into understanding paradox. Paradox, the most basic definition is paradox means something is there, although it is obviously impossible. We have these little pictures. You might know this picture of Magritte, ceci n'est pas une pipe. In a way, it is a pipe, but on the other side, it's just paper, or even less. In the moment, it's just light on a wall. So it is a pipe and is not a pipe. Both perspectives are right and wrong in the same time. Or you know, maybe from philosophy at school, the Epimenides from Crete saying, all Cretans are always liars, which means this sentence also is a lie, and if it's a lie, then it's correct, and if it's correct, it's not a lie. So however you try to look at it, you can't solve these paradoxes. But these are more or less interesting riddles for thinking. Things get more difficult if you come into communication, if a paradox comes into communication. And look at this picture that I just kicked away. You have this wife saying to her husband, finally be spontaneous by yourself and don't always wait for me to drive you to action. What does he has to do? If he says, yes, of course, now I go into action, she can say, okay, but you don't do it just because I told you. It's similar if your wife or your husband says, you never bring flowers, and the next day you bring flowers and say, oh, what shall I do with these flowers now? You do this only because I told you. I want to do this from your own, voluntarily, from your own will. Well, this is a kind of pragmatic paradox. And this is much more interesting for business families than the logical paradoxes that we started with. And I would really invite you to take a look into the book of Gregory Bateson, which is very, very seminal work in this respect. But we go, just let me explain a bit more about paradox by telling you a joke. Yeah? A joke is these two women, it could also be men, don't blame me on gender. These two women stand at the buffet, and the one woman shows her blouse and she got stained and said, "Oh, come on, I look like a pig." And the other woman says, "Yes. And now in addition to that, you have even blotted yourself." So you see, something is wrong here, but what is it? Yeah? It's an obvious misunderstanding. But the misunderstanding is the joke. And let's have a look. The first woman draws the frame on the blot on the blouse, and this gives the sentence, "I look like a pig," a specific meaning, the usual meaning that we all would share. No? And the other woman draws the frame around the whole person, and of course the sentence, "Oh, I look like a pig," is totally different if you put the frame on the whole person. So, this is interesting. Obviously, different frames convey a completely different meaning into a communication. And this is quite interesting, that obviously a logic, a context creates a frame that might bring communications into a totally different field of meaning. No? So when diverging frames come into communication, paradoxes may become highly probable. We know this constellation in its extreme forms from clinical contexts. Crazy communication with continuous double binds. Again, I refer to Bateson and to the seminal work of Schlippe, who unfortunately passed away very early. He really found the meaning of double bind in the context of family businesses, and we are happy that he at least had written some text about it. Having to do with diverging frames, that's the core job of business families. And it's more, not only in business families, it's also in our everyday life. Yeah? And we talk about the term polycontextuality in this respect. We live in polycontextual worlds. And in general, we are able to manage these situations quite well. Just like, let's take the context of a restaurant. Yeah? It's a Sunday morning, and I sit together with my wife, my children, and my friends in the restaurant. And then if you observe me, you can immediately know which communication belongs to which context. I say, "Please, I would like to have a steak and a beer." Hey, come on, get away from this cupboard there. Can you please? Do you see that I'm just about to order? Can you please look after the children that they don't do this anymore? Yeah, thank you. Well, tell, how were your holidays? Did you enjoy it? So you see, my body language, my tone of voice creates different, adapts to the different contexts, and usually everybody knows which communication belongs where to. This is polycontextuality, and this is our ability to adjust very easily to the polycontextuality of different situations. But there are exceptions. And then we experience pragmatic paradoxes, when a communication does not fit. When I would shout at the waiter and ask my wife to bring me a steak or the beer, then something would be very obvious obviously going wrong. No? So it's an essential question how do we know to which context a communication refers to? And to say it with Niklas Luhmann in this quite provocative statement, how does a communication know if it belongs into the family and not into the environment? How do we know? How do we decode the context logic in that we move? Communication, not only in families, never just happens. Its meaning depends always on the frame, the logic of the context that people communicate in. And paradoxes occur when we don't know which context logic a communication follows. Then things get into order. I think to understand these polycontextual dilemma, we have to go one step further into another term. The term is context markers. Yeah? Context markers is a term that is coined by Gregory Bateson. I cite out of his book, an organism responds to the same stimulus differently in different contexts, and we must therefore ask about the source of the organism's information. If we relate this to the joke with I look like a pig, both women in the cartoon refer to different context markers, and this brings about the joke. In everyday life, we may have many valid context markers, uniforms, buildings. I know where I sit now, and I know that I behave in a way which is adjusted to the context now. So you can quite be sure that I don't get undressed or start to dance or to whistle. So I will tell a lecture. This is marked and ensured by many little context markers, by signs, by headlines, by official roles, by according behaviors. All this gives us orientation, and we know what the context is that we are in. But from the time to time, we get into trouble. And I will tell you this little story about the Boy Scout and the Latin teacher, which is a story that I experienced when I was about 15, 16. And I understood what had happened there when I came to the polycontextuality theory. I was a Boy Scout in my youth and childhood and adolescence. And funny enough, my Latin teacher at high school was the highest Boy Scout leader in the city where I lived. And we had to, if we joined if we traveled and were on a journey, on a Boy Scout journey, we always had this little paper where we have a signature of the leader of the camp. Okay, Arist von Schlippe participated in this camp. Once I forgot this to bring this to the camp, and no problem, I can after school go to my. To whom do I go? Do I go to the Latin teacher or do I go to the Boy Scout leader? And I remember that I really was insecure after the Latin lesson. I came with my little booklet and how do I handle this? I started to use the passive. A signature has to be done here on my booklet. Okay, and he took it, signed it, and gave it back to me and said, well, Schlippe, here is your booklet again. And I remember the relief that the context markers were now clear. I knew then school is stronger than Boy Scouts. School trumps Boy Scouts. Yeah? So I knew again, which of the contexts is stronger, which of the contexts dominates. But I experienced this uncertainty, which is the correct context, and this was difficult for me to find out. And this is something which frequently happens in everyday life and especially in business families. Okay, we can skip this. This is just a little note and come to an important question. What does this mean for business families? Very good question. Yeah. We have these families. In these families, communication has a difficult job to do because they have specific polycontextual dilemmata. Yeah? Frequently, the clear context markers are missing that give a clear frame to the communication. Are we in the moment in business family logic, or in business logic? Which logic trumps which? Yeah? And I have two little interesting experiences. One is a young woman just recently having become CEO of the company. Her father, the founder, is still in the board, in the advisory board, and there is a board session, and the father takes his glasses, looks through, sees they are dirty, and says, come on, clean the glasses, please. Yeah? This is something which is not usual in a board session. Yeah? It is usual in a family that the father gives his glasses to the daughter and says, clean my glasses, please. Yeah? So you see, not even the context of a board session in the company, in the room, and with everything is enough context marker to prevent family from breaking into business logic. The other, by the way, she laughed, cleaned the glasses and gave it back, so she didn't make a big thing out of it. Another situation is the registered letter, which a colleague of me told me when he was young. He got an official letter on the paper of the head of the company, and his father addressed him as, in the German, Sie form, not you, but with the full name, and hereby I demand from thee that you separate from your girlfriend until May 31st. Otherwise, you will lose your right for inheritance and you will never be successor in my company. And he signed the letter with his full name and sent it as a registered letter to his son. You can imagine what this, how this situation ended. Of course, the son didn't decide to separate from the girlfriend. He decided to separate from the father. Yeah? But the father was not able to really deal with the difference of the logic of family and the logic of family. In our understanding of the three-circle model, which I assume you all know, we don't see the circles as systems that people are in, but we see them as specific contexts that create different meaning fields, providing different logics for communication. So the key question when it comes to conflict in business families, what logic is communication to be understood in? And now we come to the example.